Good morning. It's nice to finally see all of you. It's good to be here and to be very wet. My Uber dropped me off 6 blocks away. That was fun. But it's a big part of my teaching career to normalize chronic lateness for those of us who are maybe neurodivergent. I'm kidding. It's really good to be here with all of you. And am I speaking directly enough into the mic here? Can everybody on Zoom hear me? Yeah? Very cool. I see some very familiar faces on that Zoom. I see lots of new faces on that Zoom. I see some very familiar faces in this room. Some of y'all I am seeing in 3 dimensions for the very first time. And some of you I'm just seeing for the first time, like a regular first time. Yeah, so. I might as well get the other piece of bad news out of the way, which is that books did not arrive on time. They are now arriving on Monday. We had a delay with UPS, and so that is a big bummer as well. I'd be happy to sign your handout, or if you're wearing a cast, we could do it like high school. But yeah, so with all that said, the theme of today is how we turn difficulty and obstacles into the alchemy of awakening. So we're right on trend, right here at the onset. Thank you so much for being here. Without further ado, let's just sit. Let's just sit. There's lots to talk about, but hopefully there's even more to experience together. So let's just prepare the ground here. How many variables had to come together for you to be here in this very moment? How many obstacles did you have to cut through? How much resistance? Appreciate yourself for turning up. Life on this path isn't easy, and here you are. So let's begin breathing together. Feeling the earth underneath you, supporting you, holding you, creating a reliable base for your practice. Maybe a sense of energy moving up the spine. Collarbones a little wider, hands placed well. Lifting from the crown a little bit, undo some of this cell phone hunch we all have these days. So stretching the neck, lifting from the crown just a little bit. Forehead tilts 2 centimeters. Chin moves in 1 centimeter. The brow can unfurrow, the eyes can melt. Please let your cheeks and your tongue be so soft. And if you can, elongate the breath and send it all the way down to the lowest part of the abdomen, beneath the navel. When we breathe into this spot, it sends signals of safety to the nervous system. But if breath work doesn't work for you, for your body, and something else we can all do together is just acknowledge consciously, intentionally, that this is a safe space, meaning you are allowed to be exactly yourself within the reasonable boundary of basic decency. Exactly how you are is perfect. As we breathe, we can also consciously acknowledge that this is an environment for growth. This is an atmosphere of goodness, of compassion. We will all be adding experiences to our inner milieu of parts that lead to growth and clarity. And the last acknowledgement while we have this just preamble moment of breathing together is that you belong here. Anytime we come to a place like this, generations of meditators stand behind us. Vast lineages who sacrificed so much so that we could have this right in the palms of our hands. And so that's how much you belong here. You don't just belong here, you're wanted here. Let yourself feel claimed by the path. And breathe, be with, feel into whatever these acknowledgments give rise to inside. And so we begin. As you breathe, whether that breath is short or long is just fine. But I invite you to feel all the way down to where your tailbone is, where the backbone ends and the pelvic region begins. And as you breathe here, imagine you're growing roots right out of your backbone, descending from the tailbone, descending from your backside into the earth. As you breathe, those roots go down, past the floor, into the soil. Into the soil, rich with the earth's vitality, resilience, endless creative spark, Go down further. And then further. These spindly, porous roots you've grown into the majestic earth, who begins feeding you through these roots. And as you breathe now, please imagine you're breathing the earth's vitality up into your spinal column. And then as you exhale, just let it abide, let it resonate. You're breathing it right up into the tailbone first. Next breath a little higher. Next breath comes all the way from below up into the spine, right about navel level. And we continue climbing, inching our way upwards. Till we reach right about parallel with the solar plexus. Up from the earth through the whole spine till we're just underneath heart level. Till we're in the space behind the heart. Till we're reaching into the upper back. In alignment with the shoulder blades. Bottom of the neck. Top of the neck. Until the energy ascends all the way into midbrain. About 1.5 inches behind the point between your two eyebrows. Earth energy flowing up through the spine, landing right there, wisdom center. When I say the earth's energy, I mean the earth's strength, its fortitude, the ground that can hold anything. This is the energy of good ethics, of good choices, of wielding our power in the world well, right there in your backbone. And then you're breathing as well, right? And there's the air all around you. Even if the body has a hard time with the breath itself has these other qualities of softness, smoothness, helps us to regulate ourselves, pushes nutrients to the cells of your body. The breath is a good friend and a dancer that we dance with in meditation, right? So feel the breath right there in the brow. Let it tenderize your face. Let it bring the energy of gentleness down the jawline into the throat. Tenderness down the arms into the hands. Dare I say, the love of the breath permeating the chest, mid-torso, abdomen. It's softening the pelvis now, the hips, the hip flexors, the glutes, the bones of the pelvis. And on down the legs. Through the knees, through the calves and shins. Through the feet and toes, top and bottom. Strong back, soft front. Resilience, empowerment, tenderness, heartfulness together. Speaking of the heart, I'll invite you to try something a little bit funny. Pretend for a moment you could breathe right into the heart space, like the breath could enter the center of your chest and go all the way in to touch that strong backbone now. And then the breath flowing out from this place as well. What's it like? This is what we're here to work on. This is the essence of what we're here to work on. Very last thing. Total experiment. Try asking inside if all the busy parts of your psyche would simply move off to the side. Not because they're wrong, but because we want some space for the heart to be available. Just try that. Will these parts of me move off to the left, to the right? And just notice. There's kind of two components to today. There's a more kind of academic, almost comparative religions component of like how does internal family systems and trauma work, blend with Buddhism and how does it not, the more academic aspect. And then there's the practice and I'm here to heal something in my life aspect. And so, show of hands if you came more for the kind of the more academic side of the coin. Yeah, a couple of us. Okay, good. This helps me to steer us. And then proclaim that you're here to heal something if you want to by raising your hand. All right, beautiful. Yeah, a little of both. A little of both. Theory and experience both have value. I would privilege experience over theory, however. But yeah, so we'll have a little bit of geek out time and a lot of practice, heart tenderizing time. Right? And so, as I said, this concept I borrowed from Brene Brown of strong back, soft front, right? Good spine, but tenderness in the heart, availability of the heart, the energy of caring in our lives is kind of the essence of this work, at least from the IFS perspective, of like, how do we mature our defense mechanisms? How do we finish growing up and finish individuating and become healthy, world-wise folks who know how to communicate, know how to, handle our endless worldly responsibilities? And then also an element of IFS is how do we reclaim the things that we lost when we all grew up too soon? Show of hands if you resonate with the notion of I grew up too soon, right? Most of us in this room, right? How do we reclaim the best of our childlike qualities? How do we reclaim spontaneity, creativity, imagination, playfulness, uninhibitedness, being easy to laugh, easy to love, easy to reach out, easy to connect with, alongside financial intelligence, good boundaries, showing up on time for the Dharma talk, things of this nature. All right, I'm wearing out that joke, aren't I? Thank you, 3 people who just left. Right, that's part of the view of internal family systems. And where internal family systems and Buddhism really meet is in the primacy of compassion in the models. Right, as somebody who spent a good while practicing, a little while practicing Buddhism and a little while practicing IFS, one of the things like this combination has led me to really see is that the point of the Buddhist path is really open-heartedness when it comes down to it. All of the wealth of techniques and the wealth of theory, I mean libraries and libraries of texts and teachings and all these generations of refinement of those teachings, right? There's worldwide, I don't know how many lineages of Buddhism, really comes down to how do we open the heart? How do we extend the open heart's energies? And then how do we learn to abide in that place for longer and longer until one day we, as Peace Pilgrim once said, enter the garden never to leave again. That's the idea. And that's the idea with internal family systems as well. That's the whole point, is the power of compassion. And so since most of you don't know me, I'm just going to just share a little bit. I have some letters after my name these days, LCSW and what have you. I used to have some other letters attached to my name, like PTSD and BPD, borderline personality disorder, and polysubstance misuse, they would say nowadays, also known as being a straight-up tenderloin heroin junkie back in the day. That's where my path really started, at a place called Walden House right here in San Francisco, back when you could get real treatment at Walden House, back when you could go and actually be there for a substantial amount of time. But if you don't know what Walden House is, it's a beautiful and very interesting place. I'll leave it there. My practice really began, although there was many years of searching alongside, I guess it was really all one big searching that looked like, can I get my hands on cocaine tonight? Can I get my hands on some meth tonight? Who's got the pills on one hand? And then on the other hand, where is divine love? Where is divine awakening? And searching through things like Reiki and Hare Krishna, became an ashram devotee at one point. Met my first real teacher, Amma, back in 1999, 2000, traveled the country with her actually. But also then 2 years later showing up at the ashram, coming down off of meth. Like just living this confused kind of double life for a very long time, just this heart full of yearning. Until finally I cornered myself and had to go to a place like Walden House for 6 months, where I had the good fortune of being introduced to a man that maybe some of y'all know, named Vinnie Ferraro. Saved my life. Because whereas I had been following this path of reaching for like gold and incense and deities and chanting and bliss and ecstasy and all of these wonderful things, I was using that like a drug. Until I met with this practice that said, yo, be in your body for a hot minute. Can you? Can you hang out with just the simplicity of the breath? How do you feel towards yourself? Because my answer to was no, I can't be in my body. No, I can't be with the breath. And how do I feel towards myself? I fucking hate this asshole. And then I was so fascinated. Like, how is it that I've done all this mantra and I've done all this work and now I'm in all this therapy all day, every day. And I don't even know how to be a simple person. I don't even know how to be a simple human walking the earth, you know? I don't even know how to be friends with myself. And so this practice of just being in our body, learning to be with our breath, recalibrating from distraction over and over again, whether you call it vipassana, whether you call it shamatha, whether you call it mindfulness, mindfulness-based stress reduction, that was the beginning for me. And then somehow I end up a psychotherapist some years later. I don't know, that just kind of happened in New York City. But with having done, a decade of therapy, a whole lot of schooling, a whole lot of practice, and really finding like a foundation of sanity finally, but still with a lot of rage, still with like intimacy impossible, can't do it. Same fallouts in every relationship I have, still with just a lot of half-healed things hanging out in the nervous system and it being evident in my life, and me just saying, well, what the hell, what gives? 10 years into this practice, 10 years into therapy, master of social work, doing this work in the world, constantly looking at myself, spending an hour a day in my shrine room, what is going on? I guess some things aren't meant to be healed. I guess some questions aren't meant to be answered. I guess some things about who we are just so mysterious that we're not meant to figure it out. Ever come to those conclusions yourself? Along comes internal family systems. Somebody hands me a book one day, and it was very similar to some of the work that Thich Nhat Hanh teaches in his book. Is it called True Love or Real Love? One of them is Sharon Salzberg's, the other is Thich Nhat Hanh's, but very similar to some of the work that Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, except with a whole lot more built around an entire psych modality, actually, of inner child work, an entire psych modality of like, hey, yes, be in your body, notice how you feel towards yourself, but did you know that you can augment how you feel towards yourself? I mean, directly in this moment? Do you know that you can actually take some steps inside to shift how you're feeling towards the rageful parts of you, the wounded parts of you, the parts of you that can't with intimacy, and so on? And some of the answers, some of the questions that I thought couldn't be answered, some of the mysteries that I thought couldn't be solved, I very quickly started finding some clarity around. So this is why I'm here. This is why I'm here. Let's fast forward to the end. This is why I'm here. On my third book, Outshining Trauma, which, I can't believe I don't have a stack of them next to me. There's one at the desk. It lives.
If anyone wants to.
Right. I don't know how I got this lucky. But that's what brings me here, to offer you the same technology, inner technology that helped me clarify some things, because I think Buddhism is obviously phenomenal, worldview phenomenal, practice phenomenal, a view of ontology phenomenal in every way. And internal family systems actually had something to show me with regards to how to access the awakened state of open-heartedness with a little more ease, somehow, strangely enough. So we're going to bring these two together. On a technical note, I'll just say that I'll try to give us a break at least once an hour, if not like every 90 minutes at the most. We'll probably break for lunch, like 12:30, let's say 1 p.m. at the very latest. And then I prefer kind of discussion-based environment. We're going to do quite a bit of practice. I'll offer some talks and some theoretical breakdowns. We'll get into some dyads and some discussion groups, have some group discussion as a room as well. But if at any point you want to raise your hand and chime in with a question, please feel free. Feel free. Okay. And the other piece is, I'll just say I'm 40% deaf in both ears, and so at some point, probably at several points, I'll be like, could you speak up? So just to contextualize that. All right, yes, hi.
Also, we'll pass the microphone if you have a question or you're going to share something.
Yeah,
And we'll help each other pass the microphone, and I'll also pay attention to that. And it doesn't elevate your voice and with Ralph's microphone. It's really so that the people on Zoom can hear us, just so you know that.
super cool. So let's dig in. Let's drop in, not for a meditation so much as let's just go inside to listen together for a moment. You don't have to worry about posture or anything like that, but just take a couple of breaths and drop into the, what do we mean when we say within? We mean the body, right? And whereas mindfulness training might have us set our thoughts to the side, so to speak, I want you to just notice what's happening cognitively right now. Listen. There might be a part of you laundry listing all the things you'd better remember. A part of you that maybe is confused. Why are we doing this? Maybe a part of you assessing what's happening right now. I like this, I don't like this, I don't care. Okay. And what I'll invite here is some curiosity. Can you get curious about the fact that all of these thoughts are happening without your volition? And if you're like me, there's multiple streams at the same time. So curious. And this will sound funny if you've never done this before, but please ask inside. Is there more you would like for me to know? And notice. You might have gotten more information, you might have gotten an emotion, you might have gotten nothing, or more confusion. Just notice, and allow me to point out that all of these thoughts that might seem negligible are actually coming from a place inside of you that wants to help in some way. The laundry listing taskmaster we have inside wants us to not forget the important things. A part of you that's evaluating whether this is worth your time or not, or what's going on in this room, right? It's trying to make sure you're in the right place, in a good place. The parts of you that are maybe a little bit anxious are actually probably holding something that's more vulnerable at bay. Whatever it is, there's something in here that's actually trying to help you, even if it doesn't seem like that at first. So let's try something else together. I want you to try saying thank you. Just internally, you might need to say it a few times to make it sincere. But what is it like when you say to these voices inside, thank you. Thank you for trying to help. Just notice. Okay? And then take a breath and come on back. And let's talk about this for a minute. What just happened in there? Did you get more information? And what happened when you said thank you inside to these parts of your psyche? Does anybody want to venture an answer, share your experience? Yeah, V. Yeah. Wait, Mike is coming to you.
Thank you. So when I was listening, it was
Can
saying
you speak up a little?
Oh
Thank
yeah.
you.
So when I was listening, it's as if like something was saying, "Oh, there's a way to be in this room, and you don't know." It was the inner critic. You don't know how to behave in a group like this. And so, yeah. So that was there.
Yeah.
And variation on the theme.
Yeah.
And then when I said thank you, it was at first it was difficult to be genuine.
Yeah.
But I know that if it's communicating, if it's coming up this way, it's for a reason. So the thank you was getting more real.
How many of us actually resonate or identify with what V is saying here, that an inner critic popped out? Yeah. Ah, okay. Lots of critics in this room. All right, then we need to drop in and do something else. Let's try this then. Let's try this. If you got a critic, let's all go inside together. V, do this with me, will you? And tune back into that voice. So intense. So intense. And I want you to ask one more question then. In what way does this help me? Are you trying to keep me safe in some way? Okay. And last thing is, can you see for a moment that that critical part of your mind is actually a suffering part of your mind? Imagine if all you did all day long was go around judging and pointing your finger at people and pointing out their flaws. That's a terrible existence. And that's the life of your inner critic. And so maybe thank you doesn't make sense, but can you just say, I see you? And maybe your heart breaks for the critic a little bit now. Maybe just a little bit. Okay, let's come back. Let's come back for round two. Yeah. V, do you feel like saying more? We're going to bring the mic back to you.
Yeah, it kind of made sense when I forgot the prompt you said, but it wants me to leave and go alone. Then I won't be hurt by other people. So it's really a protection
Yeah.
because you said something like oddball or something.
Convoluted form of protection, right? Yeah. Get out of here. That way we can't hurt you. You can't embarrass yourself. Right? Yeah. Yeah. And so what happened when you said, I see you?
It was like it's almost like a child wanting protection because it got hurt before. It's not, yeah.
So it went right to a very deep place. And one thing you could do, V, if you wanted to, is just place maybe a hand on the heart or on the body and just let that wounded, whatever that is inside, know that you see them too. We're coming for them. Right? Anybody else with what you noticed in this very brief exercise? I went to some deep places right away. Yeah, my friend over here. Thank you. Thank you, V.
So the voice that I heard inside is a catastrophizing voice that's been relentless with me
I wonder why.
in recent months.
Yeah, ever since what?
In recent months,
Yeah, recent months. Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
you're going to end up in poverty. Your dental visit is going to end up going catastrophic. Your housing situation is going to be a wreck. It's incessant.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And he's trying to protect me and caution me, ill-advisedly.
Yes. So another very kind of convoluted form of protection. I'm going
Yeah.
to protect you by imagining the worst and putting you in deep despair.
Correct.
And what happened when were you able to say thank you? Or at least I see you?
I'm doing that now.
I'm sorry?
There was a softening.
Yeah, okay. There's a softening. Okay. Good. Anybody else? Thank you. My friend up here.
There was the kind of project manager voice comparing, well, what else could you be doing in this 7-minute and 27-second span of time that just happened? And was it the best use of time? And very exhausting.
The tyranny of always thinking I should be doing something else. That's what William James called it, right? Tyranny. Right? It's always there. Yeah. And so what happened when you asked maybe how that voice was trying to help?
I noticed the difference between the first round. I had the mental image of just like, and knowing, having some experience with IFS, I was already seeing it as a part. It's like, I'm gonna shoot you in the head, get out of here, Very surprisingly violent. And then the second half, it's like, no, actually, you're pretty, you're doing something for me too.
Right.
But it was the moment where I realized that it really took me out of this experience. But as soon as I noticed that it was a part of this exercise, I was like, oh, I'm in this experience.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
Very curious. Very curious. And so this usually doesn't go to super deep places right away, and today it did, which tells me I'm in a room full of practitioners, which is exciting to me, because I like going to the deep places. But one way or the other, whatever the experience was, what we can all notice from these brief shares is our psyches are alive and we are in communication with them. And it is a two-way communication. Right, that's something that I think is revolutionary. That's something that it took, until I discovered IFS. I didn't realize. I thought it was a one-way. Like if I'm angry, I'm stuck being angry. If I'm with a critic, I'm stuck being pummeled with the critic. If I'm lost in my thoughts, what do? Well, I can return to the breath, but isn't that about it? No. We can talk back. And there's responses. Things maybe got intense, and maybe not in a comfortable way. Things may be softened. We could shift our view as well. An inner critic that starts out as appearing like an enemy, a bad thing. What are we doing hanging out with inner critics in this nice Buddhist meditation center? Why would the meditation teacher have me do that? Oh, thanks, guy. But we shifted our view of that critic when I said, listen, if that was another person, and that's kind of the view we're taking here too, is like these parts of our psyche, we can treat them like other people and step into a view, at least look through a lens, even if you don't believe me, or want to really take this as like the capital T truth. We can look through a lens of these aspects of our psyche that we are in communication with. We can also view them just like we would another person. So I said the inner critic, if that was you all the time, that would be a terrible life. And we start to see that which we took to be our enemy inside, right? It makes sense to be in enmity with the inner critic on its face, makes sense as a gut reaction. But our hearts can actually melt for that part of us and see like this is a part of me that has internalized some very toxic conditioning, actually. That's sad. That's sad. And when our hearts break for our own experience in this way, that's something we call self-compassion. Making sense? Yeah. Anybody have a question or maybe an experience that doesn't conform to what I'm talking about here? Because I want to make space for the full spectrum in this room. Awesome. We're on the same page. Oh, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I actually,
Can you speak up a little?
yeah, I actually didn't sense any presence or other parts, but in hearing other people's experiences, I realized like, oh, maybe those parts are so present that I take them completely for granted and I don't see them as separate parts. They're just me. You know, so it's like that the void of being able to identify something talking to me is probably like there's something there, you know. It's just so all encompassing. I don't see it as separate.
Thank you for sharing that, because that lays bare something else we've got to talk about with regards to these parts of, whether you want to say parts of our psyche, parts of our nervous system, parts of me. This is a sloppy shorthand for just being able to break down how our, you know, as the Buddha said, no self, right? In other words, no solid self. We are fluid, dynamic. We are an interwoven system of elements more than we are a person. We are a process more than we are anything else, right? And so these parts of us, right, isn't it that I could be cruising along, maybe I've just had a really beautiful meditation and I'm kind of like at peace and blissed out. And then somebody says the wrong thing to me, or I get the wrong text message or email, and all of a sudden here's irritation and it takes over. And then how do we talk in our society? I'm irritated, I'm angry, right? Which connotes an identification with that mind state, which is what my friend over here is talking about. I didn't feel like there was a part of me present, but then I realized, oh, I thought it was just me. I wasn't identifying it as a part because I was cognitively fused, they would call it in neuroscience, with my mental experience. Whatever's happening in my mind, I just feel like that's me. But how could that possibly be true? That it's just one mind inside of me, when the truth is, like, I wear so many different masks throughout the course of even just one day. Who I am at 7 a.m. is different from the person that I am at 10 p.m. My predilections are different, my desires are different, my activities are different. At 10 a.m. I want a cup of coffee and a nice meditation session. At 10 p.m. I want Netflix and a plate of nachos that I'm not supposed to have because it's right before bed, right? So we can, in IFS, we would call this blending with different parts of us, right? We have this overall sense of ourself, but when something comes up, it tends to sweep out all the furniture and says, okay, now we're lonely. Okay, now we're dissociated. Okay, now I'm enraged. Okay, now I'm really worried about the future in some way. And so this is the model we're working with. This is a way of taking the Buddha's teaching on how we're not a solid self and bringing some granularity to it. So let's go to our next thing together. If you turn to your handout on the second page, all right, if we go to the second page, we have a little exercise here that I'll just talk us through as we go through it. I want you to think of, and now, actually, first let me say, this can be as intense or as innocuous as you want it to be. Choose your own adventure. If you want to go to a really deep place today, be my guest. I'm going to leave that up to you. If you've done a lot of self-work, it sounds like we have folks who've done a lot of self-work in this room. But if you want to keep it light today, that's also an option. So I want you to think of a repetitive pattern in your life, and we all got them. Same arguments coming up in relationships, same anxiety I'm having at work, same sense of failure haunting me after dinner parties. And an example, thank you, and an example where that played out in real time for you. Go ahead and think of that now. You can note it on your handout. Okay. Once you have your situation in mind, you have 3 questions about that situation. The first is, how did you hold it together, or at least try to hold it together in that situation? but you probably also had a reaction in that situation as well, something a little bigger. And then there was a sense of something vulnerable on the scene, the potential of harm, potential of being heartbroken or abandoned, or maybe somebody literally hurt you in that situation. And so get in touch with those three aspects. How I held it together, how I reacted, what was the vulnerability. All right. Fourth thing that we'll explore. Let's do it this way, actually. Just take a moment to think about, for most of us, it's nature. Being in nature, being with the earth in some way, isn't it? Where we feel like we can drop our guard, where we feel like we can connect, let go, where we just naturally shift into a different state of being. Or maybe there's a different place for you, or a different kind of experience for you, where you have that sense of flow, that sense of I can be unguarded, and like the heart can emerge. Where is that for you, and what is it like inside when that shift starts to take place? So there's a natural multiplicity to who we are. And you can see from this that, especially in adverse situations, there's at least three parts of your psyche that are active, at least, in the exact same moment, in the exact same experience. And there's a fourth possibility as well, the possibility of touching our deeper nature, which doesn't tend to show up in the adverse moments. But that's part of what we're here to train on, train in. So, let's drop in for another practice, shall we? Now that we've got an idea of what we're here to work with, take a moment to just check your posture, make sure you're relatively organized. Take a few deep breaths, maybe scan through the body. Okay, let's actually help ourselves get more deeply into the body. So, first, just imagine that you are walking with me out to a big, wide open field. Big, wide open space where you can see from horizon to horizon. And you're looking up at the crystal clear blue sky, and the sun is shining right on your face. The sun is shining on your face. You can bask in the sun. This isn't an ordinary sun. You don't have to worry about UV rays or skin conditions. You can just, like a child, drink in the golden warm light on your brow and on your cheeks and your lips and the ridges of your ears. You can feel that good sunlight warming and relaxing your face, somehow softening you and making things more alive at the same time. And then you let the sunlight in. You let it into the head and the brain. Sunlight flows through the neck and the throat. Shoulder tops, arms, hands. As you breathe, you can let that good sunlight flow through the torso, the front of the torso, the back body, and the interior of the torso as well. Golden warm space. Flowing in the pelvis. Down the legs. Down through the ankles and the feet. And down into the earth. I'll invite you to bring the breath back into the heart space. Let your attention go with the breath. And one thing that might help you slow down, open up, is if you let your breaths dissolve. Your exhales can dissolve, and then leave space between breaths. A gentle space, maybe half a second, maybe 3 seconds. And then gently shepherding the inhale in, and then exhale just kind of falls out of the body, dissolving into space. You can really soften into that space. Those of us who like to stay in control, I'll remind you, you're choosing to let go of the breath, and you're watching how trustworthy the breath is, comes back. So you can trust the space between breaths and soften here. Okay. All right. And so, think of your situation that you identified on the handout. Relive the memory for a moment. Live in the mind movie for a moment of what happened, what was said, who was there, where it took place. And I want you to focus on either how you tried to hold it together in this situation or how you reacted to the situation. Those would be the safest places to start. But see if you can get in touch with however that was for you, to try to hold it together or to have that reaction. Let it come up. And notice what it's like. What's shifting in the body, what's shifting in your thought streams, what's shifting emotionally. Okay? And now that you're in touch with that part of your psyche, focus there on this one particular part, which might mean that you have to ask some other parts of you to just give you some room here. But what does that part of you seem to be saying? Just listen. And I want you to shift into a mode where you're sitting next to this part of you. Like you're sort of separating out from them a little bit and you're sitting next to them. And one image I like is two old friends on a park bench. Right? Or two friends sitting across from each other at a table. So you're sitting with this, what I'll call the focus part. And you're listening, receptive. But let's check on something. How do you feel towards them right now? Just ask inside, how do I feel towards this part I'm focusing on? And be honest. Okay? Very likely that you got another part that doesn't like this one, that doesn't want to be doing this, or is sick of the same problem coming around over and over again. You should have fixed it by now. And so notice that reaction and ask that reactive part of you to step aside. Try it. Ask inside, will you please step aside? Real friendly. Notice what happens, and then ask inside again, how do I feel towards the focus part now? Come back to the focus part and sense your feeling towards them. And if you got another not so friendly reaction, I want you to ask that reactive part to please step aside, right? Maybe you're judging, analyzing, critiquing. No problem. Just can that step aside and give you some space? And now take a breath into your heart space and see if you can find just something in there that feels a little bit clear, a little bit open, and like you could befriend this focus part that's here with you. The one trying to hold it together, the one who maybe blew up, dissociated, self-medicated. See if you can find some heartfulness, or at least some curiosity about that part. And you only need a little bit to go on. Okay, and so maybe you just work on this step for the rest of this meditation if you need to. How can you get into compassion, or at least openness to this part of you? But if you can sense even just a little sliver of openness here, let's continue. Can you ask this part, in what way were you trying to help me? You might notice that this is a part of you that's doing a job. It's a lot of work. How long has this part of you been doing this job? Ask inside. And please ask inside, does this part of you like this job? Or does it ever get exhausting? And if this part somehow didn't have to protect you in this way anymore, if they could really trust that you would be okay, is there something this part of you would rather be doing? If you get an answer to that question, celebrate that possibility. And we'll work with one more question. What is this defensive part of you fear might happen if you dropped your guard? Now, that last question can sometimes bring up some tender material for folks. And if that's you, can you just lift a hand so I can know? Something tender is coming up. Okay. Yeah. And so, yeah, you can place a hand on the heart and just let that tender part of you know I'm here. And I invite you to take the view that this is a child inside of me. A child longing for care. They've been trying to get your attention for so long. And so you can let them know you have it now. And the image here is extending the heart's energies, at least basic kindness, to this vulnerable part of you inside. The image is wrapping them in a blanket of loving kindness. And you can use the metta phrases as well, if you know them, if you're familiar with that practice. Or you could just say, I love you. And so once again, saying thank you inside. No matter how this went, can you just thank all the parts of you that showed up for this practice, gave you an opportunity to practice? And let's take 5 deep cleansing breaths together, breathing in nice and big as anything that's been felt here, and then big exhale to let it go. Good. Keep going. Thank you so much to all the parts. We're going to let this all dissolve now. Dissolve, dissolve, dissolve. Turning the page. And turning down the volume on any of the emotions that are here right now, just a little bit so that there's space. Turn it down, turn it down. Okay, so let's break down what's happening here. Let's demystify some things. So the first thing I want to say is that I like Taylor's experience over here, where there was a lot of emotions coming up, but it's good somehow. There's a sense of like, this is good that this is coming up, right? Why? Because there's a sense of that one is healing. In those moments where you're in deep catharsis or something is coming up, like in the middle of like, I mean, if you've ever sat a long silent retreat, you have met some wild corridors of your mind, and there is probably catharsis at some point, but really good to be in that catharsis, hopefully, because there's a sense of I'm healing somehow, right? It's very interesting that these sorts of experiences could either be re-traumatizing or healing for us. Isn't that curious? Re-traumatizing experiences and healing experiences only have one degree of difference, and that one degree is compassion, the presence of compassion. When something comes up in the space of compassion, it's being processed, it's being metabolized, it's being digested. We are finishing up with that material. When something comes up in the space of non-compassion, we'll say, which is a very big category, we're just flooded with it, we're just in it, we're just re-experiencing it again, isn't it? Right? So hang on to that. What we're doing here is we can see that there's, let me back up. So we can see that there's multiple parts of our mind engaged in situations. And my friend over here had a very reactive part. Right? We had some still reactive parts, but a little more innocuous over here. Half of this room got in touch with something very tender as well. And the idea here is, like I said, there's so many different masks that we wear to get through the day. Isn't it? Like I'm trying to comport myself appropriately at work. It's a different way that I comport myself when I'm out with my friends. It's a different way that I comport myself when I'm alone with my partner or with my child, isn't it? The parts of us that are always laundry listing, always trying to make sure that we get it right, be on time for the Dharma talk, don't look a mess. I'm sorry, that joke really isn't getting any traction anymore, but there's a whole category of parts of us that are trying to preempt suffering or from looking like an ass, from getting it wrong, from hurting somebody else. And we call these parts of us managers because they're kind of administrating our lives. And most of us live in our manager parts most of the time. A little bit neutral, a little bit flat, maybe a little bit anxious, and definitely in our thoughts about what comes next, what do I do next, how do I steer this ship? And what that's all about is preventing our vulnerabilities from showing, our deep fears, our woundings that we hold in the background of our minds, which is amazing that we can have very deep wounding and somehow it lives outside of my consciousness, even though it's here in my body and my nervous system. That ought to fascinate us that that's possible, right? And so these manager parts are basically making sure, their whole job is to make sure that stuff doesn't emerge. Why? Because I would cease to be able to function. What if that came out around my boss, right? Or around my kids, right? So very good that we have these administrative parts of us that in Buddhism get a bad rap as the monkey mind, as the ego, and so on. In IFS, we would say, actually, that's a cluster of defense mechanisms, and what defense mechanism means is something I'm doing to try to keep myself safe. There's a fundamental wisdom in that. Even if on the surface level it's very neurotic and confused, at the level of impulse, way deep down, something I'm doing to keep myself safe. Right? So, the issue with this is it doesn't work 100% of the time. Life invariably shows up at our doorstep. Jerks and bullies invariably show up at our doorstep. Our hearts get broken. Someone we love dies. We get terrible news. And those wounded parts of us get activated. But we don't tend to stay in those wounded parts very long unless we're in the presence of certain conditions, like being here at the Dharma Collective or in a therapist's office or with a trusted friend. What we are most likely to do when those vulnerabilities are touched is we get reactive. We want to fight back, we want to run away, we want to appease the aggressor so that it doesn't get worse. We reach for Netflix, we reach for substances, and so on. Right? When my loneliness comes up at 10 p.m., why am I still single? That's when I suddenly want a plate of nachos. Right? I can connect those dots now. And so this other category of parts we call our firefighters because they're this reactive defensive system and their whole job is to swoop in to put the house back in order, get the vulnerabilities back away from the surface where they're in danger. Does that make sense? Right. But again, even though these parts of us definitely get a bad rap, the DSM-5 is all about our firefighter parts, actually. It's all about our panic and our depression and our dissociation and our substance use and everything else. The really demonized parts of us, but again, defense mechanism means something I'm doing to keep myself safe. So in IFS, we take a non-pathological view of this activity, and instead of saying this is something that needs to be cured or fixed or fought against, maybe it's a part of me that I could befriend and introduce some new options to. Because again, there's that which is being defended. Our firefighter parts actually have a noble intention, no matter, again, at surface level could be very destructive, rage, very destructive. But if we take a look at anger, what's anger? It's something that sees clearly that harm is being caused and wants to do something about it. Hi, that's also the definition of compassion. So, there's a basic wisdom there that gets filtered through layers of conditioning, familial, societal, and everything else, and then we end up with a rage that looks very toxic. But way down here, at the level of inspiration, level of spark, basic wisdom. Because again, we have the storehouse of other parts of us, holding wounds, holding traumatic memories, holding our deepest fears, our sense of unworthiness, not good enough, unlovable, I'm never going to get it right. Those core memories that we all long to wall off, keep at bay, or in IFS we would say exile. Exiled parts of us that hold this stuff. And those are the parts of us that are doing the deepest service to our nervous systems. to be a part of the psyche that is holding tremendous pain, but is willing to be back here in the background in the name of you functioning and carrying on your day-to-day affairs, that is huge. That is enormous. And it's also true that these are the parts of us that get called inner children, because those core memories tend to happen in childhood. Not that they stop there. We can, of course, be traumatized as adults, but they tend to be the youngest parts of us. When they come out, we tend to be the most childish, isn't it? Right? When I'm lonely, when I'm afraid, when I feel abandoned. So the idea is, if we can make friends with our defensive system and end the war inside, like a popular self-help technique for dealing with the inner critic is like, tell that part of you to shut the F up, right? I've literally seen on Instagram, you need to give that part of you the middle finger and tell them to stop. Be at war with your inner critic, to which I say, that part of you is like a roommate that you can't evict. Go ahead, tell them to go fuck themselves. They might go to their room and leave you alone for a little while, but tomorrow morning when you're cooking breakfast, they're gonna be in the kitchen. Not too happy with you. So if we could befriend and enter into a conscious relationship with these parts of us from a different place, I forgot the most important aspect of all of this is this isn't all of who we are, of course, because we also have our heart. We also have our Buddha nature. We also have our compassionate nature. We also have the capacity for limitless loving kindness. We also have a compassion for infinite space, to open our awareness to infinite space. And so if we can connect from that place, if we can begin to see, okay, there's my inner critic, but again, that's a suffering part of me that's also trying to help in some way, that has basic wisdom. And if I could get curious or open, or what to speak of, compassionate towards that part of me, what begins to happen? What begins to happen there? You might be able to start getting down to those wounded parts of you. In addition to entering a new relationship where you don't have to be at war with the inner critic up here, you might start getting down to the tender, vulnerable material that needs your love the most. When we start to heal that exiled material, those core memories, those big wounds, those big insecurities, again, by connecting, what in IFS we would call it self-energy with a capital S, don't let that word self throw you off. It means the same thing as Buddha nature. There's semantics involved here. If anybody wants to discuss that, we can at some point today. But when we can connect from a place of that Buddha nature or self-energy to that exiled material, if we can feel the wounding in the space of compassion, things begin to heal. We begin to unburden. We begin to lighten our load. We begin to resolve things. We begin to resolve those core memories. Maybe even we heal those core memories so much that we actually have pity and compassion for the people that hurt us, because we can see that they too were suffering. Once you start to heal the traumas that are held in your system, guess what? The parts of you that are vigorously defending you all the time have less work to do. And that looks like feeling freer and more spacious in your day-to-day life. There's a lot more here, but I want to be mindful of the time, and that the L word is upon us. Lunch. And now that I've spoken it, we definitely can't go too much longer. But is this making sense? Can you place this sort of these ideas within your experience of life and what you've been through and some of the patterns that you're living within? Yeah, what's the internal part of internal family systems? Thank you so much for asking that, because what we are talking about here is it's kind of literal, right? It's an internal family. It's an internal, just like an external family, interconnected, dynamic system wherein in every family everybody has their roles, right? The peacekeeper, the black sheep, the good one, the quiet one, the loud one. Parts of us inside have these sorts of roles. That's what we're talking about. And just like in any family where everybody wants the same thing and everybody manifests as their best possible self when they get those things, to be heard, to be valued, to be respected, to feel loved, to feel appreciated, right? To not feel alone or abandoned. When we feel those things, we manifest our best selves in family systems. Same thing inside. Same thing inside. So what we're going to do when we come back from the break is, we're gonna go deeper with this work. We're going to start getting in touch with different parts of us in different formations. I would really love to, one, make sure that we all are familiar with what it is to drop into a compassionate space inside. I've got some tricks for that. I would love to talk a little bit about the experience of polarization when two parts of me, right? Like one part of me knows I should have the salad at lunch, the other part of me wants the quesadilla, right? But what is it like when it's a bigger situation, like should I stay in this marriage versus do I need to get out of here, right? Or other places where we're at war with ourselves. We call that polarization. I'd love to get into some of that work. And then hopefully by the end of the day, we'll be in a safe enough space to dive into some of that tender exile material. We won't go into like a flooding experience where we go into our deepest core memories or anything like that, but how can we make space for those wounds to be held in the space of compassion so that we all do walk out of here with a sense of, I've lightened my load a bit. The defensive part of me, parts of me that are always at play, have less work to do. That's my aspiration for us. And hopefully you'll gain a couple of tools that you can take with you so that this can continue in your life. All right? Stay tuned.
Can I just make a quick,
This might be jumping ahead, but I guess something I would, having read books on IFS and talked to people about it, I think the most challenging part is like when you witness the parts and then there's the unburdening, but the idea of transforming the parts, kind of like there's no bad parts, you want to love and accept them, but like transforming them, like that's what I'm most interested to learn. I know having talked to others, I find they're very interested in that, but just curious to get your perspective on the transformation of the parts. And
Yeah, so technical question, and yeah, definitely ahead of the curve. But also welcome here, because where is this all going? Like, what's the point? Do we just stay in a healing process forever? I don't know. When I was working with a psychoanalyst, that's what he thought. But that's not what IFS thinks, and that's not what Buddhism thinks either. Buddhism says that there is actually a goal, you know? It's kind of an eternally evolving goal. Like once you get there, there's an infinitude to explore. So I hear. But with IFS and healing work, there's a goal as well. This is actually going somewhere. We have an objective. And there might be an infinitude to explore once we're there, but the idea here is we move in three phases. The first phase is what we're doing today, which is called bearing witness. You're just getting to know parts and starting to elicit the story of what went on and what it was like, and very much acting like a therapist within your own nervous system. Can I be receptive and help that material to process and metabolize? But then it gets interesting, because what's possible is, and I can back this up with the neuroscience on it too, what becomes possible is at some point the memories will start to emerge. We'll start to get in touch with where this all began. And since memory is in the realm of imagination, isn't it? And not necessarily accurate. And because something called the window of reconsolidation is open, I'm going to explain that in a moment, we can actually go into those memories as the adult self to meet the child or whatever past version of ourself is going through that, to finish the unfinished business, confront the bullies, set things right in some way, hold the hand of a child who went to a funeral but nobody explained to them grief and loss, you know? Those sorts of things that our nervous system needs to finish with. Right? Our exiled parts are very much like Patrick Swayze in Ghost. Right? They're just hanging around because they need some piece of the information. They need some sort of thing to finish with the unfinished business, and then they can move on. Thank you for getting it, Molly. I know. We're talking about trauma, and I drop in a glib 80s reference, but
I'm gonna go to the Pottery Studio down the street after this.
But we can actually do that work. And it is in the imaginal realm, but the imaginal realm is still impacting the nervous system all the time. When you imagine things, you feel them, right? And so that's called retrieval, which correlates actually to an indigenous practice that is native to all kinds of places on the planet, including Latin America and Africa. There's a form of soul retrieval, would be the name of the indigenous practice, of rescuing the part of us that got cut off when the trauma occurred. But IFS takes it further. We say you can actually release the storehouse of trauma. You can release the trapped emotional energy that part is holding. We call that unburdening. And it's an advanced process. It's best done in a facilitated process. We do learn how to do unburdening on ourselves in my meditation courses. At the very end of a 9-month sequence of courses, but it's possible. After all, everything you eat, eventually we release from the body. Every inhale that you breathe eventually gets exhaled, right? Everything that we take in, we're meant to let go of. Or as my first clinical mentor used to put it, pain is sacred. Pain is the fodder that we use to transform our lives. None of us would go on a spiritual quest or a healing journey if not for pain. And so it's what motivates us, it's what prompts us to come to a place like this, and therefore it is sacred. But because it's sacred, we can't hang on to it. It's not ours to hang on to. Everything that's sacred, we must eventually give back. And so we're meant to release our traumas back into the earth. And so that's what we call unburdening. And the cool thing about that is, once you let go of a trauma, what are you left with? Space. And space that you can fill in intentionally. And so our final step in the healing process is called integration, wherein we invite a part of us to integrate perhaps a quality of heart and mind that they lost along the way. So this is all very lofty, though, for where we are right now, in terms of just getting to know parts, getting to know the magic of what it is to apply self-compassion in a way. Does that answer your question? I'll just return to the geek neuroscience point here for a moment. The reason why this works, because this might sound fantastical and just like complete woo-woo stuff, like, all right, dude, yeah, you go into the memory, okay, sure. But there's a chapter in Outshining Trauma that's called How Healing Works, or How Trauma Works is How Healing Works, wherein we break down when a traumatic memory is stored in the body. Basically, a trauma is any experience you've had that where your defenses are mobilized and all the intense neurochemistry associated with that mobilized, but rendered useless for some reason. You tried to protect yourself, but you couldn't in some way, for whatever reason. And that could look like, a very minor micro trauma might be like, they sent me an angry text message and then they blocked me. Couldn't do anything about it, right? Very minor example. But it can look all kinds of ways. It doesn't necessarily, it can look lots of ways. And then what trauma isn't so much what happens to us, it's what happens in the aftermath. It's whether you are met by resources or not. Did you have a place like SF Dharma Collective to come to talk about things? Did you have a safe home to return to? Did you have to struggle to pay the rent in the wake of that horrible thing? Did you return to the housing projects in Harlem where there's killers and drug dealers down the hall? Or were you met by good friends who were psychologically minded and knew how to hold space for you? Or did you have to deal with the police? All of that stuff matters. Because something called the window of consolidation is open in the wake of a trauma. And basically, it doesn't exactly work like this, but it's a way of talking about it that makes it a little more simple. Basically, in the wake of a traumatic event, you have all this intense neurochemistry firing. And again, some of it was trying to serve a purpose and had nowhere to go. And whatever happens in the wake of that event, while your system is very sensitized, you can think about the neurochemicals from that experience mixing in with the neurochemicals that are already present, right? So if compassion mixes in with the soup that's forming, for example, if help, if good resources, if material privilege, or if you have had training in meditation and emotional resilience, cognitive flexibility, emotional literacy, you can name your experience, describe your experience, you know how to process things. If you can reach for self-compassion inside, the most reliable place where we can get it from ourselves, all of that neurochemistry you can think of being mixed into the soup. So traumatic memory, right, what could be a traumatic memory is now being augmented by the experiences in the wake of this. Eventually that window of consolidation closes and it all congeals into an imprint in the nervous system that we might call a core memory. I personally prefer the term model scene, psychoanalytic term, pointing to the fact that an experience can model reality for us, can send all kinds of messages to the nervous system of like, this is how things work. This is what happens when we love somebody, or this is what happens when we drop our guard, or this is how moms and dads act, or whatever it is. Now that's how trauma works. How healing works is, again, like I said, we actually want the discomfort to be present. We want the emotions to come up. When the emotions come up, and especially when we start having the core memory, the model scene come up, that window of consolidation reopens. All of those neurochemicals are in play again, which means whatever mixes in while that window is open is now augmenting the way it reconsolidates into the nervous system. So if you reopen what you're holding inside in an atmosphere of self-compassion, in the atmosphere of high teachings, in the atmosphere of a really skilled therapist, in the atmosphere of a very attuned partner or friend, that looks like healing. That looks like healing. If you can open the model scene and have an experience of a compassionate adult going into the imaginal realm of that core memory, see how this works? Very powerful stuff. And so I don't know, actually, because we don't have neuroscience on this yet, and I long for the day when we do. Unfortunately, IFS has been rejected by and large by academia. Academia is being forced to contend with that because IFS has, this is what Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate, these, bigwigs of the trauma world are using to heal trauma. But up until very recently, nobody in academia wanted to touch IFS because this all sounds so fanciful. So we do have research on IFS. We don't have, I want to see people put into fMRI machines while doing parts work. I really want to see what goes on with that, but. So I don't know, actually, I will say this. I don't know if we actually dislodge and release the stored emotional memory of trauma so much as we mix in so much compassion that it becomes kind of obsolete. It's sort of crowded out in a way where it becomes like so minute in the grand soup of things that you can barely taste it anymore. But what we are talking about is a very radical possibility that up until very recently, the conventional psychological world has totally rejected. You can't heal trauma. What are you talking about? Like, but wait, I could break my arm in 5 places and see it completely restored back to use. Or, I mean, also what healing means is it doesn't necessarily mean we go back to our previously enjoyed status quo, because what healing, the journey, adventure, if you will, that healing asks us to go on necessarily means that we're going to cultivate things like community, emotional resilience, emotional intelligence, emotional literacy, spiritual practice perhaps, some sort of different relationship with yourself, some sort of sense of resourcefulness in terms of how we reach out for help in the wake of needing to go on a healing journey. So you're actually going to not just emerge and be like the same old self. In many ways, you're going to be much stronger, much more resilient. This is the nature of heartbreak, right? If met wisely, any heartbreak in our lives can be an opportunity for growth, if met wisely, not automatically. I want to be careful to say that. One must have the resources available to turn it into an opportunity for growth. So, sometimes people say like, trauma is going to be the best thing that ever happened to you. Bullshit. If you have the time, energy, money, relative sanity, access to resources, and what have you, you can turn it into that, but not automatically. Not automatically. Let's do a brief practice because I want to make sure we get all on the same page of what it is we're talking about. Yeah, thank you as well. What it is we're talking about when we say self-compassion or compassion from the inside. And if you're somebody who very much, I think it's like an epidemic in spiritual cultures that a lot of us know how to give and don't know how to turn that floodlight of love and compassion around 180 degrees so it faces ourselves. But this lens of like, hey, these parts of your psyche are actually very much like other people, doing and saying things inside of you that you have no volition over sometimes, isn't it? So let's drop back into the inner space and see if we can't create a reference point. Right, a little bookmark, a dropped pin in what the energy of compassion is like, somatically. Let's return to this heart breathing together. Acting as if as one of my close people says, you can act as if there's a nose in your spine behind your heart. That's doing the breathing in and out. Let your attention go with the breath. And it seems to be true for most people that putting a little space where we can really drop down into it, little space between breaths, opens up space inside somehow. Okay. So I invite you to think of a time when you felt love for someone. It doesn't have to be grandiose. It probably would be good to not work with romantic love. But a time that you felt the energy of caring for someone. Maybe it was a simple moment in an otherwise complex relationship, just one moment. A moment where you understood someone, identified with someone, but your heart just opened to them. And this could be your dog or your cat. But live in that moment. What is it like when the energy of caring is flowing out of you, through you, and out of you? What's it like in the body? And can you imagine if you could really genuinely feel this right now? Imagine what that would be like in the body. And then imagine for a moment what it would be like if you could intensify it, like there was a volume knob and a hand turned that knob from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, all the way up to 10, 11. Take this in. This is the open-hearted state, at least a flavor of it, one of many flavors. Even if this is very slight for you, can you take a little screenshot with your mind's eye? This is a direct expression of Buddha nature. Okay. Take a couple breaths, and whatever's here you can allow to float to the background of your mind. Okay. And let's think now of a time that we felt compassion for someone. That's a little different. We have to be in touch with somebody's humanity in a different way to evoke compassion, right? Maybe it was compassion for the wildfires and the folks, evacuating in LA recently. Maybe you've been experiencing compassion for targeted communities, or just for a friend who wasn't well, maybe was sick or struggling in some way. But a time when you encountered the suffering of another in a way that didn't break you down, but broke you open. What is it like when compassion is expressed in you? I'll slow down for a moment. Live in that example, whatever it is for you, and get in touch. What is it like in the body when the heart melts like this? Can you at least imagine what it would be like if you could really touch in on like visceral compassion? Right? And not just empathy. Right? Empathy means you feel some of their sorrows, but compassion is empathy plus space. So you feel a touch of their sorrows, but there's enough space for your heart to shine towards them. There's enough space so that you can act. You're not debilitated. So imagine what it would be like, a little seed of empathy, plus space for your heart to shine, healing energy. And what would it be like if that could intensify? However slight it is right now, it gets turned up, becomes bigger, louder, brighter, more beautiful, more intense in every way. What would that be like? Okay. Create a reference point for yourself. Screenshot it, drop a pin. Now, imagine an exhausted part of you comes and sits right in front of you. The part of you that's been trying so hard to get it right, to fit in, to do all the things. And they're just exhausted. Life is merciless at times, isn't it? Even when it's good, it's hard. And so your own exhaustion with that comes to sit right in front of you. Can you at least imagine what it would be like now to let your heart melt in the same way? That empathy plus space. And you shine it, you extend it to the fatigue that's in front of you. Okay, one last little thing here is if some other part of you is popping in and resisting the expression of compassion to your exhausted part, or critiquing how you're doing it, or whatever else, if you have other parts chiming in, no problem. What would it be like if you could shine compassion at those parts too? Just said, I see you too. Oh, you're also suffering? Inner critic? Some of us are able to really get there right now, and others of us are planting the seed of that by imagining it right now. Both have value, tremendous value. So just one more moment to take in what that might be like. Om Namo. We're getting there in terms of a reference point, a place inside that we can recognize that maybe we can return to, or at least think of, should we get stuck. That's my one question. So let's talk about it. What? Yeah. Do we feel like we're creating? My whole aspiration, my goal here is to give us a sense, like all of us, a sense of what self-compassion could be like. What is the reference point? How do you know that you're in the open-hearted state? Right. And it's one thing for me to tell you about it. It's another thing for you to feel it in your own body, at least an imagining of it. And so, do you feel like we're tasting that? Do you? Because this is a precursor to doing bigger healing work. It wouldn't be safe to go into deeper healing work without this tool in the belt. See what I'm saying? So, how are we doing with that? Any insights, realizations, problems, desires to run out of the room screaming? Because yes, there is a flavor of compassion, one of the biggest flavors of compassion, that has a tinge of sadness to it, right? We're not looking for actual, like, love and light only, positive vibes only kind of experience. We are actually looking for open-hearted, on the ground, situated in the relative world, meaning we're allowing the relative world to come in and touch us, which meaning the joys, but also the difficulties. So compassion, strangely enough, can be bittersweet in nature. But it's a bittersweet, kind of akin to what Taylor was describing at the opening of the workshop of like, yeah, I'm in touch with sadness, but it's so good because it's what's true. I feel in my being like this is capital T truth, right? This is me authentically engaging with life. So there's this bittersweetness and also a counterintuitive satisfaction, shall we say. Yeah. So the open-hearted state is not one-dimensionally buoyant necessarily, right? Yeah. My friend over here, thank you so much for that great question.
I could feel the inclination toward self-compassion, but another part, as you referenced, came in and sort of said, maybe let's do compassion light. And something you said earlier, if I understood correctly, I think would be helpful for me to learn today is a way to work with the part compassionately, but also say, could you step aside so I can function in my day?
Yep. Yeah.
Because this part's not really letting me function very well.
Yeah. Yeah. That is something that we will be doing more of, right? And so maybe now's a good time for me to break that down, because I didn't do it in that practice. We did do it in the previous practice, right? Here's a really cool aspect of what we're basically practicing from IFS is called the 6 Fs. We start with finding a part of us. We focus on them. There's our second F. Our third F is we flesh them out a little bit. What are they like? Are they showing up in the body? Do they seem to be saying something? In IFS, we consider thoughts just our parts talking, actually. Is there an emotion there? Is there an image? Right? What is the part like? Flesh them out. That's our third F. So focus, for those of you taking notes, find a part, focus, flesh out. And then we want to befriend the part, right? Or rather, we do want to befriend the part, but how do we get there while being honest? How do we get there when parts of us say, no, let's do compassionate light, for example, or we don't deserve this compassion, or that's the inner critic, and I don't approve of what the inner critic is up to, or that's a part of me that's an addict maybe, and I don't approve of what that addict part of me gets up to, right? So that doesn't that mean the compassion valve gets shut off? Right? There's a conflation we have with approval and love. Approval and compassion, approval and offering the heart, because that's how it worked for so many of us in childhood, isn't it? If I approve of what you're doing, the love is present. If you mess it up, love goes away until you set it back right. That's how so many of us grew up. And let's dispel that myth right now. You don't have to approve of somebody to extend your heart's energies. You don't have to approve of what somebody's up to in order to feel compassion for them. You don't have to approve of what the administration is doing to extend your loving kindness there. Because one thing loving kindness could mean is accountability and boundaries. Important fact, right? So, compassion for the inner critic, love even for the inner critic, makes sense within a paradigm wherein we're not conflating approval and right. That's one thing. But the real thing is, the super cool thing is, what we do in IFS is, and it works with great consistency. It might not seem like it's going to, but you can, okay, here's the part of me that I'm working with, right? Let's say it's the inner critic. Ask inside, how do I feel towards this part? What'll happen is you'll get that first layer of reaction, especially if it's an inner critic. Oh, I hate this MF. This again? Okay, that makes sense, right? But we ask inside, and you might remember this from one of our earlier practices, we ask inside, well, can that first reactive part step aside? Come back to the part we're focusing on, how do I feel towards them now? And let the second layer of reaction come up. And we simply, it's so kooky that this works, but we simply ask that second part, like, hey, can you just step aside? Like the reaction always makes sense, but one of the things this model is laying bare is how much agency we actually have over some of these reactions, that we can be in communication, we can massage certain things loose. If we're asking in the right way, if we're relating in the right way to our inner world. So we can ask a second time, hey, other part, can you move to the side now? We do that 2 times, and almost every time a person can then look inside and find something that resembles open-heartedness, self-energy, Buddha nature. It might be like a little sense of clear space this big inside. It might be a little tingle. It might be a little sense of like, I can lean in. It might be just curiosity. I wonder what is going on with this part. Why is my inner critic telling me for the 300,000th time the same criticism as if I didn't hear them all the other times? Why is that? I mean, if you zoom out a little bit, isn't that worthy of curiosity? It's kind of fascinating if we can stop taking it so personally. Curiosity, we don't have to go right to compassion. On your handout, you'll also see the 8 C's of self-energy. Compassion, I would say, is kind of the kingpin, if you will, or the highest form. It's the doorway to enlightenment, according to the Buddha. But we also start with actually 4 of the 8 qualities that you see there. We start with calm, clarity, curiosity, and then compassion. I would say that calm, clarity, curiosity, these are entry-level states of compassion, right? And curiosity is a really easy one to see. Like if we can just get to curiosity, we start learning about, we lean in and we ask some questions, right? We start learning about these parts of us. And it's like the Dalai Lama says, if you could really understand what it's like in somebody else's shoes, you would never be upset with them. If you really knew what their struggle was like, if you really knew the causes and conditions that led them to this point, you would have compassion for them. Right? So curiosity, entry-level compassion, we're learning what it's like. So if we can just be curious, that's enough. But I find that this all starts in a very similar way. Just a little sense of opening, a little sense of I can lean in, a little shift, and like I can be here with this part of me. Does that make sense? Yeah. Should we put this into practice again? Let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah. Yeah, let's just do a brief experience here for the sake of time. Take a breath into the heart space. And I mean, isn't it true that we're all exhausted? Isn't it true that we could all use way more days off, way more vacation time, way more time with friends, way less time running errands, way less worry about the state of the world? So can you find a part of you that's just, tired of all the running around? If you can contact that place inside, great. I think most of us just went right there. So you just found a part. Focus on that part. And if you couldn't get there, notice what's happening. Are you blocked? Are you distracted? Resistant? What is it? Blank? So whatever's present for you is a part, and let's work with that part. You just found a part as well. So focus there on what the feeling is like. Maybe there's a story running in the head. Maybe there's a sensation in your body. Breathe. And discern that this is a part of you. I mean, it maybe wasn't even here 30 seconds ago. One part of you. And can you shift back into that mode where you're sitting next to them? Or sitting across from them, maybe backing up a little bit so you can sit across from them and see them more clearly. Okay. Ask inside yourself, how do I feel towards this exhausted part of me? Or whatever they feel like. How do I feel towards them? Okay, if you could get to some openness, some curiosity, great. Stay right there and ignore what I'm about to say. If you have a different reaction coming up to the exhausted part, ask inside, acknowledge that reactive part, and ask inside if it can just step to the side. Notice what that's like. Notice if anything happens. Okay. And then ask yourself again, how do I feel towards this part of me now? And the second reaction to the exhausted part might come up. Oh, I'm analyzing them. I want to fix them. Or something else. No problem. Acknowledge this reactive part. And just ask them to step aside. It's okay, we got this. But I can guarantee if your parts will let you get to something resembling curiosity or compassion, they'll like the result, actually. When the heart opens even a little bit, every part feels better. And so that exhausted part, can you extend your heart a little bit towards them now? If yes, stay there and ignore what I'm about to say. Just extend the heart towards the exhausted part. Be there with them, listen to them, feel them. Now, if you're stuck, something in you dug in their heels and said no. Now that's the part you're focusing on. What are they like? And can you shift into that mode where you sit next to them? The part that is digging in their heels won't let you open up here. Sit next to them. And very quickly we'll repeat the same steps. Right? How do you feel towards that part that's blocking you? It's okay if another part that's reactive to the blocking part comes out. But ask them to step aside. And then check in again. How do I feel towards the blocking part now? If you can get to something open, curious, kind, friendly, warm, great. If not, ask whatever's in your way now, last time, to just fall back. Just give me a chance. It's safe. It's really safe. Can you sense a little bit of openness now. A little calm, a little clarity, a little quivering of compassion. All right. Gently opening the eyes, take a breath. So here's what I hope we're taking away from today, at the very least. First of all, we are more awake and alive and aware and responsive than we conceive of. There are things that are alive and moving and having experiences and holding experiences on us that we actually don't even know about. That tells us something about Buddha nature, actually. That tells us something about the nature of our being, the nature of our existence, the nature of reality, actually. That alone. And we can start to identify some of those alivenesses held in the subconscious, unconscious layers of mind that do pop out and emerge as emotions, thoughts, images, and what have you. We can identify them as parts. And parts that have specific functions, either protecting me or holding my pain, basically. And not all parts are unhealthy, right? Like we have tons of parts that are healthy and functional and what have you, but those aren't the ones that get our attention by creating chaos in our lives. We only turn around and ask questions and do processes like this when there's trouble in some way. But in identifying that there's parts of us that are discrete, even though they're interwoven and there's a dynamic, right, interplay there. Just like us as beings, right? We are discrete beings, and yet there's a place in which we are all one. According to the Buddha, at least, there's Indra's web where we are interdependent, and as MLK said, whatever affects one person explicitly affects the collective implicitly, right? So as there's that saying, as above, so below, as within, so without, and vice versa. And you have a relationship to each of those parts. You can be bound up with them. You could step back from them. They could be your boss, telling you what to think, say, and do next. They could be your enemy, something you fight against, war against. Or you could befriend. You can figure out, how do I get into a space of curiosity, openness, and befriending with these parts? In befriending parts, much more becomes possible, much more becomes available, right? And this. How many in this room, I should have asked this way earlier, identify as Buddhist or have a regular meditation practice? Right? Yeah. Yeah. How many in this room are familiar with Sharon Salzberg and the practice of metta, loving kindness? May you be happy, may you be well, and all that, right? Yeah. Yeah, great. So that's the vast majority of us, right? And you can meditate with these parts. You can go into a therapeutic process like some of what we did today, working with the process of inquiry. And if you're curious about that, fantastic. There's so many resources for going further. There's so many resources on my website. There's so many, Richard Schwartz is like on Spotify, Parts Work Meditations on Spotify now. What? 21st century is wild, y'all. 30 years ago, psychology was smoke and mirrors. Now we have Richard Schwartz on Spotify. But lots of ways to go further. If this spoke to you in some way, some aspect of this spoke to you in some way, lots of ways to go further. And the one thing you can always do, even if you're like, yo, I couldn't get to some self-compassion today, or yo, I got stuck, that seemed to go sideways. One thing you can always do is that process of Tonglen that we just practiced together. I offered it also last night at Big Heart City. I will have an audio version of it up on my website very soon, once we get the clips from last night. I believe there'll be a recording of today as well, that we can share a clip of that practice if that spoke to you. You can also offer your parts loving kindness. Right? You could, once you feel your sadness, in loving kindness practice, you have these different categories of individual you work with: a friend, an enemy, a neutral person, and so on. Put your sadness in one of those seats. May that part of me heal. May this part of me know happiness, right? And so not only are we more alive and awake than we think that we are, we also have more options than we think that we do. And I think something about this model of honoring the natural multiplicity of mind lays that bare. And so I hope you're at least taking this much with you today. But we have a little bit of time for discussion here at the end. And I'm just curious, what questions are still alive in y'all, or what wants to be spoken into this space? Let's just take 10 minutes and then we'll dedicate the merit and peace out. Yeah, and the microphone's gonna come around. Thank you, Pamela.
Thanks. I've been wondering today how to tell the difference between body distraction, tiredness, blank out, and a part that's embodying that or doing that as a habit.
Right. That's a good question. That's a good question. Do you have a regular parts work practice with yourself?
Informally, not IFS, but drawing on other, Buddhist protector.
Yeah, it's really tricky. So yeah, the question is basically how, if something's happening biologically, right? How can I tell the difference? How can I make sure that's actually biological and not something that's psychosomatically generated, right?
When I know that spacing out and ignoring and a voice that says,
Yeah.
there's nothing happening here, nothing to see here. I know that I do have that part, but
Yeah.
I don't know how to tell the difference.
Or even, I encourage my students, like, if you get sleepy in meditation, go to sleep. Learn how to take naps sitting up. We're here to honor the body, listen to the body, let the body give us information, so follow that information, right? But also, that could be a sophisticated avoidance strategy, right? And the way you figure that out is time and curiosity, because that's one of those kind of inner fine lines where only you can be the judge. And this is where the ethic of always being honest is really important, and not telling little white lies in your world. So that way you don't have little white lies with yourself, and you can tell the difference between these things, right? But it takes practice to be able to tell the difference between these things. What I want to say also, though, is there's another place that's even less innocuous than that, which is when it comes to chronic pain and illness as well. One thing I would want everybody in this room to know is we always have parts that are involved. If we have pain, if we have illness, if we have injury, there's always parts that are playing off of that situation too. They can make it worse, they can make it better. They can bring the pain up, they can bring the pain down. That's very interesting. We have lots of research on how the subconscious mind can actually block the effects of medication, which is the same thing as saying parts of you can block the effects of medication. very well-established lines of research around that, which is very fascinating, right? So bear that in mind. There's been times, and one thing you could do with exhaustion, or even with pain or illness, is you could take the sensations of it to be a part of you. And it might just be biological, but you could go to the pain as if it were a part of you and relate to it, talk to it, see if you can get into compassion for it. If you could get into a space of curiosity with that exhaustion, you would probably find out. Right. Yeah, did you have a question, Pamela? Yeah, tell me.
Pamela, not the person who passes the mic, Pamela.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's really a question. It's just kind of a comment about compassion and something that for the first part of the day, it doesn't matter actually, that piece. I have found something that's been really helpful for me, and I experienced it today, was working on how I understand compassion, like what my expectation of that is.
Good.
Which today when I was with this part, it was like the compassion for me was actually really just sitting with the part, because the part was like busy with itself, still quite dense, and the capacity to just kind of even have space between myself and the part, and that sort of holding and just being like, oh, the witness of the part. In that, there was like a lot of compassion, but it wasn't a like heart opening kind of like, oh, like it was just like, oh wow, this character is intense, and I'm just gonna hang out here.
Yes.
So I kind of just wanted to share that.
No angels descended from the heaven playing harps, and no bodhisattvas crowded around to bless you. Compassion has so many flavors, right? Like the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva of compassion has 1,000 arms. And just being with, I think it was Simone Weil, a philosopher, who said attention is the rarest, most precious form of generosity. Right? How hard is it to get someone to just sit with us and be receptive? Generally speaking, you gotta pay a therapist, you know? To have somebody just receive you and not be thinking about what to say next, not be thinking about, oh, that connects to my story this way. Right? Yeah, it is a pure form of big generosity. And I was smiling so big at you just now because I love when this comes up. Because what you just described was actual mindfulness. That's what true mindfulness is. Here's the contents of my mind. I'm a little bit separated out from that, but I'm present to it. And my heart's open to it. And not much needs to happen except being with it, right? That's to me, that's true. That's what the Buddha was talking about with mindfulness instructions. So mindfulness practice is parts work. And the purest essence of parts work is mindfulness practice. Isn't that cool? How do you feel overall right now, having done that powerful work?
I mean, that was like in the first part of the day, and then I noticed I was very tired after lunch. I mean, I was tired after that practice.
Yeah.
And I did kind of have a Dharma nap when we came back together. And now I just feel like, okay.
we should have like siesta meditations after lunch on Daylong retreats. Right? What's wrong with our society? Don't answer that. Yeah, so was there one more? Yeah, we can go one, maybe two more. Great.
I did have a question.
Yeah, so we'll go Molly and then my friend over here. Yeah.
So I've been doing parts work with my therapist and also on my cushion for a little while now, not super long. But I do have a long-term, I've been practicing Tonglen for like 10 years, huge Pema Chodron fan. Lots of loving kindness for self. And what I'm noticing is happening as I do the parts work with my therapist is like a day or two later, I will do parts work on like something not super deep. Like we're taking it slow, right? But like 2 days later, I will have a nightmare about the core trauma hard. And I'll be okay afterwards. Like I'm pretty grounded right now or I wouldn't be doing the parts work.
Yeah.
And so, but I mean, it's enough that like, I mean, the last one, it was like, I stayed pretty pissed off all day. And I was able to like reach out to my sibling and like process a little with her. So I did have the resources to deal with it, but it was just like, here I am working on this thing over here and it's like, but let's go for the big shit now, you know, like on my own. I'm wondering how common that is.
Super common. Super common. I mean, not like, I can't give you a percentage or statistics on that, but it's, if we think it through together a little bit, I mean, this is why we have resistance to meditation. This is why we had resistance to coming up all over the place in today, just everybody at some point. It would be crazy not to have resistance, because even if you're just sitting down to do a basic mindfulness practice, your unconscious mind senses, hey, we've got a Pandora's box of untended material. All of us, we live in a traumatic society. The very values of our society are traumatic, and we live and breathe in that every day, right? So we've all got a Pandora's box that could be opened. Because try as you might to engineer your healing process such that, okay, we're going to do the safe stuff only. Your parts have minds of their own, which again is another thing that should blow our minds wide open. Like, I have multiple minds within me, and some of them have a volition that doesn't belong to me. What? Right. So, you know, in my online courses, we try to take it like, okay, we're going to spend a month working on manager parts. We're going to spend a month working on firefighter parts, and then we'll create a safe space by then to go down to the traumas and the exiles. But within week 2 of doing manager work with folks, people are like, my fucking worst childhood fears are assailing me. What do I do? And it's like, we can only engineer it so much. So it's super common. And all that is you have some exiled parts that are saying, hey, I see what's happening in these therapy sessions, and it seems real good. And so maybe there's finally space for me. I'm sick of waiting. Does that make sense? Yeah. Keep at it with the Tonglen. Yeah. Thank you. Last but not least.
Well, yeah, Ralph, I wanted your perspective on something. You talked a little bit today about how when you're working with one part, oftentimes other parts will get in the way because they're trying to make a little bit of noise as well. And you gave us some tools about how to ask them to step aside so we can focus on the one part. But I've heard you talk maybe in other times about how sometimes it can be worthwhile to actually pivot to some of those other parts if they're loud enough. It might be that they are the thing that needs more attention in that moment. So maybe there's not a right answer, but I was wondering how do you decide when to pivot to one of those others versus persevere and say, I said I wanted to work with this part and I don't want to get distracted. I'm going to follow through with that.
Right. I mean, if there's, what I find is This is another one of those intuitive, like, fine lines that we hold inside where only you can figure that one out. But here's what I find to be telling in these kinds of situations, is if there's a part of you that's determined, we're going to stay the course and heal this. It's time to pivot. And you know what it's time to pivot to? The part of you that's determined. If there's any sort of goal-orientedness in our healing process, that's not coming from self-energy. That's coming from another part, and it's most likely there's a subtle form of self-hatred there. It's not, I want to heal this suffering part of me because they're suffering. It's, I want to heal this part of me because I'm sick of this, right? And so there's a such thing as being in true self and having parts run interference strategies and all kinds of sophisticated stuff to inhibit the process, and it's worthwhile to stay in that process with those parts. This is a point where I start consulting people outside of my therapist too. When this has happened for me, I start looking to other resources to help me shake that loose. There's that paradigm, but there's also a paradigm where, yeah, there's another part that has an agenda, right? Good question, because it allows me to leave us on this note that it turns out healing does not come about so well from having a list of all the things that need to be fixed and working on it. You can do that, and you'll feel a little better. But healing, as in like meaningful, lasting shifts in our lives, turns out is a byproduct, natural byproduct of something much more circular than that. Befriending, getting to know, being curious, being willing to just be there in a kind and friendly way. When we can do that, when it becomes a process of just getting to know ourselves, extending compassion to ourselves, not because we're trying to be a good spiritual person or because this issue in my life has to change or whatever, but because I'm me. I'm worth getting to know. Healing comes about very naturally and strangely enough, very quickly from that kind of approach. The other way, I don't know. It got me halfway there. So let's just drop in one last time together and close this thing right. I appreciate each of you for your presence, your patience, your practice. Thank you for spending this day with me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to grow in this way from each of you. Let's return to that sun shining in the center of the chest and breathing right into it. When the sun rises in the sky in the mornings, there's a sense of freshness and possibility. There's a sense of renewal and hope. And so let your sun rise and shine in the chest, but shine out to the world. Shine out to all sentient beings everywhere, including beings going through things I know nothing about in places I haven't even heard of yet. Together we pray that may any of the merits or good momentum that we've caused here may it just be given away to other beings who need it. May any insight or joy I have found here be multiplied to infinity for the happiness and welfare of others. May all hearts heal. May all beings be happy. And may we all be free. Om Namo. Thank you all so very much. May our paths cross again and again. I'm so sorry I don't have books to sell y'all. But the book is, you can check it out right over there, Outshining Trauma. And yeah, see you all next time, huh?